The moment I watched my sister raise that champagne flute to her lips and smile at the crowd of 240 guests, I felt something I hadn't expected. Not rage, not satisfaction, just a quiet, steady calm, the kind that settles in your chest when you realize the worst thing you ever feared has already passed, and everything from this moment forward is going to be okay. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back to the beginning, to the woman who made that moment necessary. My sister is 3 years older than me, and she has been the center of our family's universe for as long as I can remember. She's beautiful in the way that people notice immediately sharp cheekbones, the kind of thick auburn hair that looks effortless even when it isn't, and a smile that makes strangers feel like they've known her their whole lives. She built a lifestyle brand from scratch, starting with a blog she started in her early 20s, and eventually growing into a social media presence with just over 400,000 followers. She documents her life in the way that makes everything look curated and aspirational: her apartment, her wardrobe, her vacations, her food. Every photo, every caption, every story is carefully constructed to project one thing: perfection. The problem is that when you've built your entire identity around being the most impressive person in every room, it's very difficult to watch someone else walk into your room. I got engaged in March. My fiancé, I'll call him by the name he goes by with everyone who loves him, which is simply my husband, now proposed at a small dinner with close friends. No big production, just the two of us, and the people we actually wanted around us. He's a structural engineer. He's steady and funny and the kind of person who remembers small things, like how I take my coffee and which side of the bed I need to sleep on, and that I can't watch movies where dogs are in danger. We had been together for 4 years. I knew the proposal was coming. I cried anyway. My best friend, Renata, was there that night. She's been in my life since our first week of college, when we were assigned to the same orientation group and spent 3 hours complaining about the campus map together. She's a pharmacist now, running the clinical practice at a large hospital downtown. She is meticulous, observant, and deeply, almost comically unimpressed by anything that isn't backed by evidence. She is the best person I have ever known, and she was the first person I asked to be my maid of honor. Renata said yes before I finished the sentence. I told my family the following weekend. My parents cried. My aunts called within the hour. My sister showed up at my parents' house in a white linen outfit with a bottle of champagne and immediately began talking about what role she would play in the wedding. Not asking, talking, announcing. "Obviously I'll be your maid of honor," she said, already scrolling through her phone to show me venue accounts she'd been saving. "This is going to be incredible for my brand. A destination-style event, your husband's family, the aesthetic alone is going to be stunning content." I looked at her over the rim of my glass and said, as calmly as I could, "Renata is my maid of honor." I already asked her. The silence that followed was the kind that presses against your ears. My sister set her phone face down on the table. My mother made a sound like she was trying to inhale and speak at the same time. My father suddenly became very interested in the label on his beer bottle. "You're not serious," my sister said. "I've been close with Renata since I was 18, I said. "Of course she's my maid of honor." What followed was not a conversation. It was a campaign. Over the next 3 weeks, my mother called me every other day with a variation of the same theme. My sister was hurt. My sister had been planning to be part of my wedding for years. My sister had already started drafting content ideas. My sister's followers would be so moved by a story about sisters supporting each other. My father sent me a long email. My father, who has never sent me a long email about anything in his life, explaining that weddings were about family unity, and that excluding my sister from the most important role was sending a message. My sister herself sent me a voice message that was 11 minutes long. I listened to 4 minutes of it before I turned my phone face down on the counter and went to make tea. Here is what I want to be clear about. I did not give in. I kept Renata as my maid of honor, but under enormous pressure from my parents, who were contributing a significant amount to the wedding budget. I agreed to include my sister as a bridesmaid. I agreed to let her give a toast. I agreed to let her document whatever she wanted on her social media, within reason. Those were the concessions I made. I made them consciously, with open eyes, because the alternative was blowing up my relationship with my parents 6 weeks before my wedding. That was the calculation. I'm not proud of every piece of it, but I understood the math. What I did not understand, what I could not have anticipated, was how far my sister was willing to go. The wedding was planned for October at a renovated estate outside the city. The venue cost more than I want to say out loud. But when you factor in the catering, the florals, the photographer, the band, and every other line item that wedding planning somehow generates, the total landed at just over $78,000. We had saved for 3 years. My husband's parents contributed graciously. My parents contributed the amount they had promised. Every dollar was accounted for. The rehearsal dinner was the Friday before. My sister behaved herself, or at least performed behaving herself, which should have been a sign. She complimented my dress. She was warm to Renata. In the careful, surface-level way she interacts with people she considers competition. She gave a toast at the rehearsal dinner that was 20% about me and 80% about herself, but I let it go. One more day, I kept thinking. Just get through tomorrow. Saturday arrived clear and cold and gold-leafed, the way October mornings in that part of the country can be when everything cooperates. I got dressed with Renata and the other bridesmaids in the bridal suite starting at 7 in the morning. My sister arrived 45 minutes late and spent the first hour taking photographs of herself next to the flower arrangements. Renata met my eyes across the room and gave me the smallest, most controlled smile I have ever received from another human being. It communicated everything. The ceremony was beautiful. I will not give the details of it here because some things are not for anyone else, they belong to the two of us, and to the people who were in that room. What I will say is that I cried twice. Once when I saw my husband at the end of the aisle and once when he said my name in his vows, and that both times I was too present to care about anything else. The reception began at 6. The venue's ballroom had been set up in the way we had planned for months-long tables draped in ivory and sage, candles at every surface, the kind of warm light that makes everyone look like the best version of themselves. 240 guests, a band that I had been saving a playlist of for 2 years. A dessert table along the far wall that Renata had helped me design, anchored by a 6-tier custom cake that had cost us $4,200 and that I had tasted 3 times during the design process because I believed in knowing exactly what I was paying for. Dinner was served. The band played. My husband danced with his mother, and I danced with mine, and for about 90 minutes I genuinely forgot that my sister existed. Then it was time for the toasts. Renata went first. Her toast was exactly what I expected from her: warm, specific, funny, in the precise way that only someone who has known you for 12 years can be funny, and ending with something that made half the room reach for their napkins. I was so proud of her I could barely hold my glass. My sister went second. She had dressed, I noticed now, in a way that was slightly more attention-commanding than standard bridesmaid protocol, a shade of lipstick that photographed very well, her hair in a style that looked casual but had clearly taken significant time. She held her champagne flute and smiled at the room the way she always does, the smile that performs warmth while calculating angles. I was sitting at the head table. My husband was to my right. Renata was to my left. The champagne had been poured while Renata was speaking, the servers moving quietly between the tables, refilling flutes for the toast. What happened next took less than 4 seconds, and I almost missed it. I had turned slightly to my right to say something to my husband. My body was angled away from the table, toward him, my champagne flute sitting unattended in front of my place setting. My sister, positioned at the end of the head table where she'd been seated, reached past the floral centerpiece while every pair of eyes in the room was on Renata finishing her toast. I caught it in my peripheral vision, the slight movement of her hand, the tiny container, something that fit entirely in her palm, small enough to look like nothing if you weren't paying attention, the way she leaned in just slightly too far to be reaching for something of her own. I turned back. My champagne flute was sitting exactly where I had left it. Nothing looked different. She was already pulling back, straightening, adjusting her wrap like she'd done nothing at all. I didn't move. I didn't say anything. I looked at the glass and I thought, very clearly, she just put something in your drink. I don't know exactly what I expected to feel in that moment. Shock, maybe. Disbelief. But what I actually felt was colder than either of those things. It was the feeling of a piece clicking into place of something I had suspected, somewhere very deep and quiet, finally confirming itself. I picked up my champagne flute. I turned to Renata, who was sitting to my left and who had already stood to pass the microphone to my sister. She sat back down next to me and I leaned close to her. "I need you to look at this glass," I said quietly. My voice was very steady. "Don't react. Just look at it." Renata is a pharmacist. She has spent her professional life understanding what substances do to the human body. She took the glass from me with the same neutral expression she uses when she's reading a lab result, tilted it slightly toward the candlelight, and looked at the surface. I watched her jaw tighten by about 2 millimeters. She set the glass down and leaned back toward me. "There's a fine residue just above the waterline on the inside of the glass," she said. Her voice was completely level. "Something was dissolved. I can't tell you what without testing it, but something was definitely added to this glass." I looked at my sister, who was now standing at the microphone, smiling at the room. "Switch your glass with mine," Renata said. "No," I said. "Give me yours." She understood immediately. She slid her flute toward me without a word. I placed my original glass, the one my sister had doctored, in front of my own place setting, and put Renata's untouched champagne in front of her. Then I rearranged the placement just slightly, so that my original glass was pushed a few inches to the right, into the space where my sister would naturally reach when she returned to her seat. My sister's toast ran 9 minutes. I counted. It covered her childhood, her brand journey, her thoughts on marriage as a content category, and included 3 mentions of her own Instagram handle. She said my name 7 times and my husband's name twice, which tells you everything you need to know about the toast. When she finished, the room applauded. She stepped away from the microphone, floating back toward the head table on the approval of 240 people who had no idea what had just happened. She sat down. She reached for the champagne flute in front of her, the one I had shifted into her space, the one she had prepared for me, and she raised it for the toast. The MC was saying something. People were lifting their glasses. My husband's hand found mine under the table. My sister drank. I watched her do it, and I felt that same cold, quiet calm I described at the beginning of this story. Because here is the thing about that kind of moment. You don't feel triumphant. You just feel still. You feel the specific stillness of someone who has stopped bracing for something. We moved through the rest of the toasts. The band returned. Dessert was served. For about 30 minutes, nothing happened, and I began to wonder with the small, practical part of my brain that never fully turns off whether I had been wrong about what I saw. Then my sister stood up from her chair and steadied herself against the back of it. It was a small movement. Most people at the reception didn't notice it, but I noticed it, and Renata noticed it, and my husband noticed it because he was watching me watch her. She moved toward the dessert table. The particular unsteady quality of her walk was not the unsteadiness of someone who had too much to drink over the course of an evening. It was the abrupt, disproportionate quality of someone whose body has received something it wasn't expecting. Her coordination was off in a very specific way. She was working hard to compensate for it, and working visibly. She reached the dessert table. She put one hand on the edge of it to stabilize herself. What happened next was not dramatic in the way that things are dramatic in movies. There was no slow motion. There was no swell of music. She simply lost her balance just a few inches, just for a moment, and her hand slid along the edge of the table, and she went forward, and the 6-tier custom cake that had cost $4,200 shifted on its stand and came down. The sound it made when it hit the floor was extraordinary. The room went silent in the way that rooms only go silent when something genuinely unexpected has happened. Every head turned. The band stopped between measures. My sister was on the floor of the venue with ivory buttercream across the front of her bridesmaid dress, and what I can only describe as a structural column of cake collapsed around her. There was a moment, it lasted maybe 3 seconds, where nobody moved. Then the venue staff materialized, the way good event staff always do, and the conversation slowly resumed, and my husband squeezed my hand under the table so hard I felt it in my wrist, and Renata leaned close to my ear and said, in a voice that was impressively composed, "Well, that happened." My sister was helped up. She was not seriously hurt physically. She was fine. Disoriented, visibly impaired, buttercream in her hair, wearing a bridesmaid dress that was now a documentation of consequences. Her mascara, which had been flawless for the entire evening, was not flawless anymore. One of the venue managers was beside me within 60 seconds, professional and calm. I told him quietly that my sister had been unwell and might need assistance getting to a car. I did not say anything else in that moment. There would be time for the rest of it later. My mother appeared at my elbow, ashen. She had too much to drink. She didn't, I said. Just those 2 words. I looked at my mother in a way that I had never looked at her before, not with anger, but with the particular clarity of someone who has finally stopped pretending not to see something. She didn't, and we're going to talk about that. But not tonight. My mother opened her mouth. She closed it. She looked at me for a long moment and then looked away, and in that look I saw something I had never seen from her regarding my sister. The first fragile crack of accountability. My sister was escorted out by her boyfriend and my father approximately 20 minutes later. She was coherent enough to walk, impaired enough that she needed support. She did not look at me on the way out. I sat at the head table and watched her go, and did not feel anything except that same remarkable, unexpected stillness. The band played 4 more hours. The dance floor was full until midnight. My husband and I had our last dance just after 11, and the song we chose was the one we had argued about for 3 weeks before both agreeing it was exactly right. I wore my dress until 1 in the morning. The photographer caught the moment my husband and I stood at the edge of the venue's terrace, looking out over the grounds, not saying anything, just standing there together in the October cold. That photograph is on our wall now. 3 days after the wedding, Renata brought the champagne flute which she had quietly secured before it was cleared from the table to a colleague at her hospital, who ran a basic toxicology analysis on the residue. What my sister had added was a crushed prescription sedative. Not something you can buy over the counter, not something you stumble across by accident. A sedative that, combined with alcohol, produces significant impairment, the kind that would have made me visibly, embarrassingly, reputationally unwell in front of my husband's entire family at my own wedding reception. Renata presented me with the written results. I forwarded them to a lawyer. My sister was not arrested. The legal process for something like this is longer and more complex than television suggests. And I am not going to pretend it moved quickly or cleanly, but what I can tell you is that the evidence was filed. The formal complaint was made. Her boyfriend, to his credit, was so appalled when he understood what had actually happened that he did not stay her boyfriend for very long after that. Her brand partnerships, the ones she had been protecting and cultivating, and planning to monetize with wedding content, went quiet when the story began to circulate in the way that stories do. My parents were devastated in a way that felt, for the first time, like genuine accountability rather than performative distress on her behalf. My father called me and did not make excuses. My mother called me and cried. And for once she was not crying about my sister, she was crying about what she had allowed, what she had enabled, the years of imbalance she had papered over with the word family. It was not a perfect conversation. It was real, which was better. My sister sent me a text message 9 days after the wedding. It was long and carefully written, and hit all the expected marks, the apology, the explanation that stopped just short of being an excuse, the appeal to our shared history. I read it twice. I did not respond. I am not sure I ever will. Here is what I know now that I did not fully understand before. You cannot protect a relationship that only one person is trying to preserve. You can love someone and still understand that their presence in your life costs more than their absence. Those two things can both be true at the same time. And coming to terms with that is not a failure of love. It is just the end of a particular kind of hope. I told my husband about the pregnancy 6 days after the wedding. I had known for 2 weeks by that point, found out 4 days before we got married, which meant I had walked down the aisle already knowing. I hadn't told anyone. Not Renata, not my mother, not the photographer who caught me holding my stomach on the terrace that night because I thought she was shooting somewhere else. I'd known, the night of the reception, that I couldn't drink the champagne even before I saw what my sister did to it. I had been drinking sparkling water all evening and nobody had noticed because the glasses look identical in candlelight. That was just luck, or timing, or whatever word you use for the convergence of circumstances that turns out to mean something. My husband cried, which I expected. What I didn't expect was that he would laugh first, a short, disbelieving laugh before his eyes got bright, and then reach for me without saying a word, and just hold on. We sat together in our kitchen in the early morning, 4 days home from our honeymoon, and I told him everything from the beginning. About the pressure to include my sister, about what I had seen at the reception, about the champagne and Renata, and the choice I made in those few seconds at the head table, while his mother was still applauding the toast. About the toxicology results, about the legal filing, about my mother's phone call, and what it had felt like to finally hear her say what I had needed to hear for a long time. He listened to all of it without interrupting. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment. "You handled that alone," he said finally, not as an accusation, just as an observation, delivered very gently. "I handled it with Renata," I said. "You should have told me." "I know," I said. "I'm still learning how to let people in." He looked at me for a moment with the expression I have come to understand means he is deciding which true thing to say. "You don't have to manage everything by yourself anymore. he said. That's kind of the whole point of this. He was right. He is usually right about the things that matter. My daughter was born the following July, 7 pounds and 4 ounces, with her father's ears, and what my mother insists is my grandmother's mouth. We named her something that is only for us. She has been in the world for a few months now, and every morning when I look at her I think about the year that led to her, the wedding, the reception, the champagne flute, and the 6-tier cake, and the photograph on the terrace, and the conversation in the kitchen, and the slow, deliberate work of untangling the parts of your life that were never really working from the parts that were. My sister and I have not spoken. I have not closed the door permanently. I don't know yet what permanently looks like, or whether I want to, but I have closed the door for now, and for now is enough. Renata came to the hospital the morning my daughter was born and sat with me for 3 hours, while my husband went to get food that neither of us ended up eating. She held my daughter and looked at her with the same meticulous, evidence-based attention she gives to everything. And then she looked at me. She's perfect, she said, with a certainty that sounded like a clinical finding. I know, I said. I did know. I do know. There are things that have to fall apart before you can understand their shape. My wedding was one of the best days of my life, and one of the most clarifying. I walked out of it with a husband I trust completely, a best friend who has never once let me down, a legal case in progress, a daughter on the way, and a much cleaner understanding of who was actually on my side. That seems like a good return. If you're carrying something like this, a sister, a brother, a parent, someone you love who has spent years making themselves the center of every story that should be yours, I want you to know something. You are allowed to see what's in front of you. You are allowed to act on what you see. You are allowed to protect your own glass, your own life, your own moment, even when every message you've ever received says that the polite thing, the loving thing, the family thing, is to look away. Looking away isn't love. And I am not looking away anymore.